All right, for the second part, you are going to get the graphs and you need to make an equation that fits it. So anytime you have these, when we can write these one of two ways. We can write it with the x first, we can write it with the x second. I'm going to start by writing it with the x first because that's definitely the easiest. So for all these, I can start with x at the front, and then I can start with that number that the dot is on. So like I can start with -3, I can start with 51, I can start with 8, and I can start with -8. Now, the symbol is just going to depend on how this reads and how this is true here. Okay. Now, I know with the filled in dots, that means I'm going to include the 51, so I can put the little line underneath it because I know that's going to be an or equal to. Okay, I should instantly know that if it's filled in. But now we have to go through and ask the question here. Okay, the arrow is pointing this way, so numbers would be like -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3. All those are something that should work for this. So you can read through this, figure it out, but always make sure you go back and check to see what you wrote makes sense. So for instance, if I did this, okay, let's say I put this in here, okay, now I'll go back and pick a number that is supposed to work because anything that this is pointing to, this direction, should work. So for instance, if I go all the way down here, 5 would be down here eventually. So let's check and see if this works. 5 is greater than -3. You betcha, 5 is greater than -3, so that works out, so I chose the right symbol. If I would have put this in, 5 is less than -3. That's false, so I know I need it the other way. I want to make the number sentence and the number line make sense, and everything that the arrow is pointing to, I want to make sure makes sense in what I have down here. Well, let's come to the next one here. I need numbers smaller than 51. Okay, and since it's smaller than 51, if I have my x first, that should be a less than. And I already put my or equal to underneath because the dot's filled in. But I want to check and make sure that I'm right. So let's pick a number that this arrow is pointing to that should be a solution to this. So if I go from 51 down, 30 would be down here somewhere. That should work. So let's try it. 30 is less than or equal to 51. That's true, so I wrote it correctly. And I need this line at the bottom here because it should be an or equal to, because 51 should also be included. So I want that or equal to. Coming down here, looks like the arrow is pointing below 8, so I need x to be less than 8. So here's what I would draw on right here, pretty simple. Anything below 8, so like 6 is below 8. So put this in, 6 is less than 8. Yep, that works. -100 is below 8. -100, less than 8. Yep, that works. Now I come to this one. We've already put our or equal to because it's filled in. I know that -8 needs to be included in this. It's pointing to the right, which would indicate we want it to be greater than. Anything over to the right is bigger. Anything over to the left is smaller. So I'm going to have an or is greater than or equal to. A number that would be over here somewhere. -2 would be over here somewhere. So if I put -2 in here, -2 is greater than or equal to -8. That makes sense. And I've got this line here because up here it shows that the dot is filled in, meaning that -8 is correct. Now, you may have to write these equations two ways. If you start with the x, it makes writing the other way so much easier. We just have to flip it around. So if I flip this one around, that's what I would have. And again, just make sure that the symbols are facing the same directions that they were before. The open mouth is facing the x here. The open mouth is facing the x here. And it still makes sense. If I put a 5 in here, -3 is less than 5. Yep, that still makes sense, just like it made sense when you said 5 is greater than -3. That makes sense. So to flip this around, 51 is greater than x. To flip this around, it would be 8 is greater than x. And to flip this around, it would be -8 is less than or equal to x. Most of the time you're going to see it written with the x first, but know that the flipped around version is the same thing. Now for these, I want you to attempt to write the equation both ways. And again, whatever you put, make sure you really think about it. Think about which way the arrow is pointing. Think about which way it's telling you that the answers are, and then put it into your actual inequality that you wrote and see how it works. Pause this, try it out, and then come back and see how you did. All right, let's take a look at this first one here. And again, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and write all the x's first, because I know we're going to start with the x, and then I'm going to put the circled number on the other side, so that would be 0, that would be 4, that would be 101, and that would be negative 13. Okay, and understand that these graphs, depending on who makes them, who teaches them, who writes them, could look different. We could have a whole bunch of numbers off to either side here, with this one being in the middle. I could have the 0 like here and a whole bunch of numbers over here, 0 not being in the middle but still having the circle above it. I could just simply have 0 here and have nothing around it, just with the arrow pointing the direction. You would just have to know that over here would be negative 1 and over here would be 1. Let's draw the symbols in. This one is going to be an or equal to, and this one is going to be an or equal to. This one should be less than or equal to, because if my numbers over here might be like negative 5 is less than or equal to 0. The flipped around version would just look like that. Here, looks like this is also a less than. Down here I would have 0 somewhere, so I'm going to need less than. 0 is less than 4. That makes sense. Flipped around version, just like that. Here, it's a greater than, so my number needs to be bigger than 101. So like numbers like 104 would be fine to work. And let's make sure that makes sense. 104 is greater than 101. That's true. The flipped around version of that one would just be that. 101 is less than 104. That still makes sense. Either way you flip it, it's still true if you read it through. Last one, we want it to be bigger than negative 13. So maybe negative 2 would be over here. Negative 2 is greater than or equal to negative 13. That's right. Flipped around version would be negative 13 less than or equal to x. If I put that in there, negative 13 less than or equal to negative 2, that makes sense. And again, the filled in dot means I need to make sure that I have a symbol that will include negative 13. We do, because we have the or equal to part right here. Last thing I want to show you, and we're not going to do a lot of sample problems on here because you're going to have some on the homework assignments that you're going to have here, but keywords. You're going to see, a collection of different real-life situations that will use these keywords, and you will need to write an inequality to represent them. So keywords for this symbol, for the greater than symbol, would be like more or bigger. Okay. Keywords for the less than is just going to be less or smaller. These are really the tricky ones right here. Greater than or equal to, you might see at least, or you might see a minimum of. That means greater than or equal to. One example, let's say Jimmy has at least 10 hamburgers. Okay, if Jimmy has at least 10 hamburgers, that means he has at least 10, and he could have more, so we want the greater than or equal to symbol. Over here, if we say that Jimmy has at most 10 hamburgers, or Jimmy has a maximum of 10 hamburgers, that means that 10 is the most, but we could count 10 and anything underneath it. So these are going to be kind of tricky, and you'll have plenty of examples to help you figure out. But the key to this, after you write your inequality for this, go back to the situation and choose numbers that would fit the situation. Then go back to your inequality, put the numbers you picked in, and make sure that it makes sense. If you have any questions over these keyword problems when you get to these or anything else, make sure that you let me know.